We'd like to thank Mainspring Companies for sponsoring Season 1 of The Next Entrepreneur. Mainspring celebrates the entrepreneurial journey, and we are very grateful for their support.
First trip to China to Nanjing, and I was in negotiations to sell all that design and equipment to a Chinese joint venture with BASF, and it was the only plant in the world that was designed for that same feedstock. So it was the only shot we had to do that, and we sold it at basically the plant's cost, but we had bought it, knowing basically put very little value on it because we didn't think we'd be able to sell it to anybody. So all this engineered equipment that was stored, it cost a lot of money to get it back in shape. But that literally, again, for a middle-class guy from Baton Rouge to travel the world, to be in the room. I'm 56 years old now, and I have gray hair. And I remember walking in the room with all these gray-haired English bankers in one meeting, and they're looking at me, oh, good, they didn't send the A-team. And a week later, they're begging to come, be our bank.
Hello, my name is Andrew McClendon. I'm your host of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. I'm here today with our producer, Mr. Daniel Sagona with Propel Productions. Daniel, thank you for the great job that you are doing for the Next Entrepreneur podcast. And our guest today is Mr. Tim Barfield. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, man. Really excited you being here. So, look, particularly in these conditions with Hurricane Laura, you guys have an office in Baton Rouge, but also New Orleans, Lake Charles, and Dallas. Lake Charles took a direct hit with Hurricane Laura. So to start off, how were your employees and your facilities? And then if you can get into a little bit about giving us a little insight into what your understanding of the situation is in that area.
Sure will. Our employees are fine. Their houses are a little beat up, but it's different to some of the other hurricanes we've had. Not a lot of flooding, a lot of roof damage, a lot of damage. So I was out there Sunday and I was out there Monday, and power lines are just down everywhere, and a lot of roof damage, a lot of trees down. So our office is actually fine. The area around our office was pretty beat up, and we rent an old house there, and we've been kind of looking to upgrade our office. The business has done well there, and we were kind of hoping something would happen to the office, but nothing happened to the office. It probably fared well than 90% of the stuff around there. But all in all, it's I'm hearing it could be three weeks to a month before you get power back.
Well, I saw some images online of the major transmission towers knocked down.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, that does not look good. And I'd heard some things about 6 or 8 weeks, and that would certainly be understandable when you're looking at that level of magnitude. But I also heard there was like 17,000 utility workers in the area, which is a massive.
I-10 is, driving those 2 days there just filled with utility workers, and they're all over the place. And literally when I was checking on our employees and checking on our clients, they would literally be driving in front of you, pull over and start working on something. It was just seemed almost random, but but at the end of the day, like you said, the transmission, you saw just regular creosote coated poles just snapped in the ground, and then you looked at some of the transmission towers, that connect the lines, and they're just twisted up like somebody just bent up a erector set when you were a kid, and we have a Chenault Air Park's a client, and Sewella Community Technical College out there is a client, and they had a lot of damage out there. And the executive director of Chenault, Kevin Melton, stayed, and he said he and another employee were just holding a door. It was a metal door inside a building, and they could just hear all this noise, and the door started bowing on both the top, the bottom, and they're just leaning on it, hoping that thing, scared to death that they're going to get sucked out if that door comes open.
That's terrifying. But I also heard like substations, were knocked out. And I mean, it seems like, the electrical infrastructure is really taking it on the chin. But then on top of that, you hear about, the problem with water service.
Yeah, the water service. So what I heard indirectly was Clico was saying they've already ordered twice as much equipment and supplies as they ordered at Rita, and they haven't even finished yet. So that gives you a sense of the magnitude of the electrical impact. And then at one of the houses of one of our employees, I stepped in, used the restroom, and there's a trickle of water. You could wash your hands. It would refill the toilet. But I know the hospital, one of my friends is an executive with the hospital, with Lake Charles Memorial Hospital, and they had to evacuate everybody because of the water. They just can't. They got to have water pressure.
So do you, in your business, do you guys have had conversations of what the near future looks like for the area? I mean, is it practical that they can start seeing some semblance of normalcy in 3 weeks or 5? Or, I mean, is there any talk out there about how long of a road this could be?
So the latest thing I heard on power, so 3 weeks, I think there's going to be areas that are going to be a lot longer than 3 weeks. And same, consistent with what you said. I know, again, one of our employees has 2 kids at St. Louis High School, and it has evidently been just pummeled. And the early information is maybe they can be back there sometime in the January, maybe. And then the elementary school with another child is fine, but they don't have anywhere to live right now. And so we're trying to help them find places close by. Lafayette, I mean, driving back a couple of days, it seems like once you got east of Jennings, and they've been staying in Beaumont and Houston. So it's not, the semblance of normal is a very relative term right now. I think we've found that our communities are much more resilient than we give them credit for at times. And,
well, we've certainly seen that over the years. And like, for example, and I've said this on the show before, but after Katrina, I wondered if New Orleans would ever make it back. And look at it now. It's thriving. It's better than ever. And it made opportunities for improvements in education. And so the end result is a lot of good came out of it. So Louisiana has a lot of experience with that. But and I know your company will be instrumental in that rebuilding, and we'll get into that a little bit. But why don't we start with defining, if you can, who is CSRS? But before you do that, actually, let me tell you this, because if I go back 30 years, and I am asked to define who CSRS was, it's fairly straightforward, right? It's an architecture and engineering firm. In fact, Norman and Curtis, Norman Chenevert and Curtis Soderberg, had their architecture firm, and then they joined forces with Sanji and Rodi and the engineering firm. And that was actually fairly unique to have a company like that back then. And then in the mid-'90s, they got into some program management, which was very forward-thinking. But today, you guys do so much. So I was curious how, what's the thumbnail? What's the elevator speech for what CSRS is, and what do they do?
Well, it's funny you ask that, because I've been there 4 years, and we've had, a few different strategic planning exercises and a couple of marketing exercises, and that's the hard thing to do for us. We're such a different company. So we've really said, our mission is to build stronger, smarter communities together with our clients, with our citizens, with our other stakeholders, and then beyond that, it revolves around the built environment, right? So it's infrastructure, it's facilities, but it also involves it's evolving into other things. We do a lot of planning work, which again, ultimately, hopefully, revolves around the built environment. We're involved with some of the watershed modeling and planning. We're managing the state's watershed initiative that's funded through CDBG, and So we do a lot of different things, but it all comes together to just building stronger, smarter communities and centers around the built environment, generally speaking, but it also leverages a lot of those other capabilities and know-how. So it's spun off over the years into economic development. It started with siting, helping with site certification and identifying sites and estimating what the cost of bringing a site up to the needs of a target company could be, and that's evolved into maybe a little broader branch of services on the economic development side. And the workforce side, we do a lot of work in the education space, and I have a lot of experience on the workforce side, having run the Workforce Commission, and a big passion for workforce development. So we find ourselves doing more and more on that. And so it's a very interesting set of services. And, you know, I'll say one of our strategic advisors that we brought in for some planning said, you know, we talk about our clients, particularly in the service business, becoming a trusted advisor. And once you become a trusted advisor in one area, you can build, you can expand and diversify into other service areas. And he's, you know, his first brush at our company is we did so much. Do you need to be doing all this? And as he delved into the history, you know, he said, you have become, but you know, now this is kind of what we go tell our clients, but y'all started this 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. You became the trusted advisor. When your client had a need, you went and helped figure out a solution for them and you delivered it. Next thing you know, you got this broader portfolio of services. And that's CSRS. And while it looks very unusual for a smaller company, 120 employees in Baton Rouge, it's not too different than what you see with some of the big national A, E, and C firms throughout the country. You know,
I see something really entrepreneurial in that, in which you're saying is, you know, instead of just taking this, we're going to do one thing, we're going to do it well, which is very, very successful for certain businesses. But, you know, I've always looked at it as, you know, if I see a client that's struggling with another part of the process, and that we could provide a solution there, then that's a good thing.
It's a great thing. I think it's a great thing, right?
So,
especially in a world that's, if anything's happened with all the technology, it's just the changes are more frequent, right? Sometimes more dramatic, but probably more just compressed in terms of the disruptive technologies and business models and the disasters we've had and pandemics. And so you look at all the external forces in business that existed 30 years ago, but with technology and maybe, you know, some of the climate change factors and other things, you just have so much forcing you from the outside to adapt and evolve. And I think our model was very predisposed to that very well.
Yeah. Well, I love seeing what y'all are doing. I think I've found this descriptor of your CSRS online somewhere, but it's essentially a LA-based design and management firm specializing in delivery of infrastructure and facilities to public and private entities, where you plan, design, fund, and implement sustainable projects, recover disaster with more resilience, and navigate political bureaucracy so that clients can achieve their goals. And I'm like, man, there's a lot going on there. But particularly when I consider looking back 30 years where it was design and engineering, and then you start talking about, you know, funding, and, you know, and I'm sure that comes up in your program management and in helping with bond issues and things like that.
Yeah, we have a grants management side of the business that, for the most part, is centered around FEMA and CDBG funding. But over the years, for instance, on the RSD program in New Orleans, there were 12 different funding sources.
And the RSD is a Recovery School District.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was post-Katrina rebuilding schools?
It sure was. I mean, we came in 2007. I think there was a previous grants manager that kind of struggled a little bit, but we've been there. I think we're on our 5th contract with a partner, Jacobs Engineering, and been challenging. And you have a lot of challenges. There were some really incredible things. One of the first, I think it was the first global settlement, FEMA structure at the time was usually sort of building by building.
Right.
And it was a global settlement where they shrunk the number of schools and were able to do some things strategically to help the whole recovery school district. And now we're turning buildings back over to what's now called NOLA Public Schools. And so you've seen a lot of progress down there, and a lot of great buildings, a lot of great facilities now. So, the question becomes now we need to educate the kids, keep improving in that area, and we need to maintain them and keep the momentum.
Right.
And a lot of good things.
Resilience has become a big thing,
Yeah.
I guess, probably mainly since Katrina. It certainly existed before then, but what is resilience?
So that's I don't think I've really heard that term used like this 5 or 6 years ago, but it really was an outgrowth of a lot of the disasters, and Katrina and Rita were probably the epicenter for that. And New Orleans became one of the development centers of resilience, and you had big NGOs and foundations like Rockefeller Foundation finance some pilots. But it's, I think the basic concept behind resilience is we shouldn't be getting destroyed and rebuild every time. We should really look from a holistic way in terms of planning, in terms of design, in terms of materials, in terms of using the natural features of the land, in terms of other methodologies, innovations. How do we become more resilient? How do we have a hurricane like a Hurricane Laura and not have all this damage, right? And avoid the damage in the first place. And some of that is, upgrading codes. I think South Florida has done that very well. Along the coast of Florida has done that well over the years, where they've, upgraded their codes, and they have events, right? But they don't seem to have, particularly on the coastal areas, because of the code enforcement and the code improvement. They still have damages in places that, are older and haven't done that, but they've done a good job with that. So a lot of it's that, but it's really kind of it's anything and everything that can go and help your community be more resilient, including some social and cultural aspects.
Oh, that's interesting. So it seems like there was a project, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of it, but there was a community that was relocated.
Ile de Jean Charles and Terrebonne Parish.
And you guys were involved in that project, right?
Yeah. It's still ongoing. We've started construction, and they found a new site in Terrebonne Parish, and it was funded by a large CDBG competitive grant that the state won. And it's a very interesting community and very unique, even in Louisiana, where maybe unique is overused. This is a very unique community. And it's got a couple of different Native American tribes that the residents are tied to. It's got a strong Acadian background. They were very isolated. They grew their own food. They fished. They hunt. They trapped.
And how big a community? How many people are we talking about?
So by the time everything was finalized in terms of the grant and we started work, there were only a little bit less than 90 residents living on the island.
Okay.
And through the years, most of the people had moved off and went to higher ground, literally and figuratively. That they went to other opportunities for education, for employment, for stability. But you still had a lot of residents that wanted to be there. And so part of the goal here is to, and it's really sinking into the marsh. The road there, interesting, I hadn't heard a report since these last two storms last week, but there was concern about, well, you may not be able to get there by road at all, but it was inaccessible parts of the year.
Yeah.
And the trees had died because of saltwater intrusion, and you couldn't really grow things there. So it's the first project of its type in the United States, but we think there'll be a lot more of those. So.
Well, I was curious if there has been thought about that relocation of communities either prior to the storm or if it's popped up since the storm, and I don't know anything about the communities in Cameron Parish or around the areas where the storm damage is, but it does seem that, when you look at the storms that have hit in the last decade or 15 years, they're coming at a pretty repetitive pace, and it just seems that people love where they live and their culture, and particularly in South Louisiana. But there's sometimes you have to begin to question whether there are other alternatives. But have you seen or heard of any?
There's a lot of discussion. There's a if you look closely at the state's coastal restoration and protection plan, it infers that you're going to have a lot of there's going to be a lot of land loss, right? So some communities are going to be impacted by that. So that's something that's been it's evident from looking closely at the plan, but it's something that is an outgrowth of the coastal loss and will happen. And certainly there have been discussions around that. There's been actually from Maine to the Northwest with sea level rise and subsidence and everything else. This is not a new problem. It's not solely us. We just happen to get some of the original tract funding. And then there's some other communities in Louisiana that right now are going through looking at that. You just can't keep restoring a community that's flooded.
But it's a highly emotional subject, right? I mean, I find myself just dancing around the words, just trying to even ask the question, But
it's emotional. It's got a lot of politics involved. I mean, obviously, because the residents, like you said, you live there. I mean, why do people not want to evacuate when a hurricane's coming?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
They got strong stakes in the ground, right?
That's home. Okay, Tim, let's take a quick break there, get in a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. We would like to thank Mbd Automation for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Mbd Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, and end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. Mbd Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If Mbd Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. And we are back with Tim Barfield, President of CSRS. So, Tim, I wanted to dial it back a little bit, and you've had a really, really interesting career. And you've had some amazing opportunities, and earned every one of them. But it's just, it's really fascinating to see what you've done. I just wanted to walk through that timeline. But you're a Baton Rouge guy, right?
Yeah, grew up here.
And went to LSU, got a finance degree, and then a law degree.
I did, yeah.
From Paul M. Aber here at LSU. And then you clerked for Judge Palazzolo, right?
I did. He was a great boss, great guy to work for.
Well, I mean, I've heard that several times, and I seem to know of a couple of people that may have done that through his career, and they all went and did some pretty impressive things. So he must have been a great teacher.
He's a great teacher. When you clerk for him, you're an employee. He taught me a lot about management. You were part of his family, and there are some great people that have clerked for him. Jay Darden clerked for Judge Palazzolo before me, and been many.
How long does a clerkship last?
So when I did it, it was I committed for a year, and today's judges typically want you for more than a year. They want you for 2, maybe 3 years. But back then it was rare. Sometimes they'd have a permanent clerk, and then they would bring in some clerks on 1 year or so. And but it was really a good experience. You learned a lot. I've always learned by observation, so I learned a lot just watching lawyers and watching trials and watching hearings and everything. It was a really good experience.
So you ended up in Texas.
Yep.
Was that your first job as an attorney at a law school?
It was. I went over there and worked for Vincent & Elkins, which was a big Texas-based national, international law firm, and did corporate securities and M&A work, which was just fascinating. You'd work on something and you get up the next morning and read about it in Wall Street Journal, and that's kind of where I've realized that the press often has some really good information, but they rarely have all of it, and sometimes it's not so good.
But is that what attracted you to that firm, the specific work that they did?
Yeah, I was hoping to do transactional business type work, and they are a great firm, and they were a great firm, great place to learn. I learned a lot about running a service business there. They kind of taught, they did an orientation that was, I still think, was state of the art. Now looking back 30-something years later,
wow!
But they taught you the laws of profession, but it's a business, and they taught you what it takes to be, a partner and what they're looking for, and it was about relationships. It was some of the best advice was go develop relationships with our clients, at the people at your level, and they'll be moving up there, or they'll be going other places, and they're going to hire you, and that's exactly what happens.
Oh, that's
that
cool.
was really good.
So how long were you there?
I was there 4 years.
4 years. And then you made it back to Baton Rouge next?
Yeah, so one of the guys that recruited me to Vincent & Elkins was a guy named Tom Kiggins, who's with Phelps Dunbar, labor attorney here. Well, he came back to Baton Rouge, and he knew Brett Talbot, who was the CFO at Shaw at the time, and they were looking for a transactional attorney, and probably a lot greener than anybody should have brought somebody back to come in as a general counsel at Shaw. It was through that contact that I ended up at Shaw.
So how old would you have been?
I was 29, about to be 30 years old when I started.
So as a 30-year-old, you're coming in as general counsel for a firm that was, the growth that they were experiencing was really at times dizzying.
Yeah. Personally, it was dizzying at times,
So I remember running into you a couple of times over there. We were our accounting firm did work for Shaw as well, and they reached out to me. They knew that Shaw was looking for a small contractor that could build out an office for them, which is what we did at the time. And I was forewarned. I said, look. They said, look, you're going to meet with Mr. Bernhard, and he's real straightforward. Have all your facts ready, and you'll be fine. And so I was meeting with Brett, and Jim Bernhard walks in and says, what kind of fee you want to make on this job? And I said, 10%. He said, when can you start? I said, Monday. And he shook out and reached my hand, and he turned around to walk out the room like that was the deal. And then he turned back to me and says, now, is that the fastest job you ever got? I said, yes, sir. And we ended up doing like a nonstop build out of this building when you guys had just moved into the IBM building on Meade Road.
Yeah.
And then I would run into you there. And I think we were starting off building out maybe a half a floor, a third of a floor, and then we built out like a floor and a half, and we never stopped. It just because y'all just kept growing and growing and growing, and that was back in the day when Shaw was, advertising or they were the largest pipe fabricator in the world, right? Which for us. For a Baton Rouge company or Prairieville company, that was big. That was big dealings.
Big
right?
deal. So it's interesting you talk about entrepreneurship. I consider Jim one of the, really finest entrepreneurs I've ever been around. And it was probably early on, might have been in my interview. And I said, well, what's your vision? And he said, we're a pipe fabrication company. We want to acquire some niche engineering that we can add some value to piping systems, so we can have some value add and not just be a commodity. And then we'd love to get some construction capabilities to get in industrial maintenance and construction, so then we can start selling piping systems as a unit and not just by piecemeal. And if we do that well, we can grow more into industrial maintenance, industrial construction, and then I'd love to go pick up one of these old big engineering firms that really, forgot how the world's rotating and it's not rotating the way it used to, and then we can go out there and we can challenge the Floors and the Bechtels of the world and everything else. And literally, I'm sitting there probably 7 years later, and all that had happened. And it even said, and then we'll go get a governmental contracting unit, which is a great place to bring some stability to that. And that was really one of the key things I did. We bought the IT group, which gave us this huge governmental contracting platform, did a lot for Department of Defense and Department of Energy as well as others. And so it was just fascinating. That was in 1994 where we had that conversation, and we bought the IT group in 2002. So it was really in 8 years.
And I remember the timing of that IT group acquisition was right around when all of that anthrax situation was going on in the postal sector.
Yeah.
And I think the timing was just like right then. Y'all it was right in the middle of it or right before it, and next thing you know, it was almost like another thing turned to gold.
There's some fun stories behind that. So I was in charge of what we called special projects, which was M&A, but it was a lot of other things too. So we were going to 2001. I think we played Illinois in the Sugar Bowl, and we were on the way to the Sugar Bowl. I got a phone call from one of the guys we had gotten to know during the Stone and Webster transaction, where in the bankruptcy culture is really interesting. He said, look, there's a company that's in your wheelhouse that can't make payroll in 2 weeks unless they find somebody to be a stalking horse, which is the term for a pre-packaged agreement. And we had airplanes at Shaw, and I said, when can y'all meet? They said, we can meet tomorrow. I said, okay. So we're driving to the game. We had a hotel room. We had our families. Gary Graffia had just become our general counsel. I guess he had been there a little while, and he's like, I said, Gary, after the game's over, you and I got to come home and pack, and we're going up to Pittsburgh. We're going to go look at this. And, I remember Gary's attitude, this is a waste of time, and we got our families here. I said, well, this is what we do. You got to go dance with everybody and see what happens. 2 weeks later, we had that prepackaged agreement, and nobody had shown up and even met with them, and we had already started due diligence. And the bankruptcy process is very open. It has an auction component so other people can come look at it, make sure you get an honest offer and everything. But that's that South Louisiana work hard, play hard, right? And you drop, I'm sure you've done this 100 times in your business. You drop what you're doing if it's a good opportunity for your business. And the M&A world's a portfolio world. You got to build a portfolio of opportunities. Not all of them go very far. Some go pretty far and they die. But you just have to have a mentality that you got to go do your job and do that. And that's really was a big part of the Shaw culture. And it came directly from Jim. He was very inspirational in that. But I've always felt like that was one of the things that, being part of that team, that entrepreneurial team, and we had a great team, and we had some great people that were good at what they did, but they could also go in and get things done and negotiate and do things.
And that was the IT group.
That was the IT group, and we hit it at a very interesting time because the anthrax scares. And I remember being in one of the Senate buildings and talking to a senator. He wanted us to disinfect the building but not kill his fish. So there's lots of challenges with that.
Well, you mentioned the Stone and Webster deal a minute ago, and that one particularly fascinated me because it was a 100-year-old company or something, and coming from a construction background, they were like, something to behold. And the fact that here this company out of Baton Rouge, Shaw, was, going to buy Stone and Webster was just mind-boggling to me. And then I was further fascinated once I read, and this was all public information. I think it was like a $100 million deal, but it came with this portfolio of refrigerated facilities that was worth $70 million when y'all sold it for $70. So you actually got into the core part of Stone & Webster for like $30 million. And I was like, you got to be kidding me, man. I was utterly fascinated with that.
Well, I can't remember all the numbers, but it was a fascinating transaction. First of all, a few months before they went into bankruptcy and Jacobs was their stalking horse, Jim had noticed that a report that came out of Barron's that the sum of the parts was more valuable than their stock price. So we started buying some stock, thinking, we can accumulate some stock and maybe go talk to him. And well, he didn't read into Barron's report. He kind of figured it out. And then the Barron's report came out and the stock went up. So we sold the stock, said, never mind. But we had done a lot of work in terms of the potential that this company would fit well. They were a customer. We did piping for them and things like that. And they got in trouble in Asia, in particular Indonesia. They had done a big ethylene plant over there, and they didn't have any payment guarantees or anything. About halfway through, the client canceled it, didn't pay them. They had, I want to say, $200 million worth of engineered equipment and design and everything done there. And among other things, there was a lot of going up there. So Jacobs was a stalking horse. I was working at our fittings manufacturing and distribution subsidiary in Shreveport, and I got a call. We're going to go up there and we're going to bid on this thing. And so I led the team that went out there and cut deals with creditors. So there's a very unusual bankruptcy in that you had there was probably they didn't have any liquidity, but they had a worth that was probably going to pay 100% of the debt when the bankruptcy was over, but they didn't have the liquidity to pay their bills when due. So we went out there, and I went out there, and I led the team that went and cut deals with, bonding companies, with customers. I got to know. It was a fascinating project, and we scrambled. I think we had something like 6 weeks to do this. Wow. And I'm literally finalizing deals on the courthouse steps before we go into this auction. Really wasn't a courthouse, it was in a hotel, but a bankruptcy led auction against Jacobs. And I don't think Jacobs took us seriously. They're like, well, these guys don't have the resources to do this. And we turned about, I want to say, $250, $300 million of liabilities into half that in actual, and that allowed us to kind of go bid for it. And then we saw we had a plan going in there that these are the assets we want to liquidate and try to get, we don't want to be in this cold storage business. Right. So, and then I led a lot of those efforts. And then I went over to China, first trip to China to Nanjing, and I was in negotiations to sell all that design and equipment to a Chinese joint venture with BASF. And it was the only plant in the world that was designed for that same feedstock. So it was the only shot we had to do that. And we sold it at basically the plant's cost, but we had bought it, knowing basically put very little value on it because we didn't think we'd be able to sell it to anybody. So all this engineered equipment that was stored, it cost a lot of money to get it back in shape. But that literally, again, for a middle-class guy from Baton Rouge to travel the world, to be in the room. I'm 56 years old now, and I have gray hair. And I remember walking in the room with all these gray-haired English bankers in one meeting, and they're looking at me, oh, good, they didn't send the A-team. And a week later, they're begging to come, be our bank. So, it was a lot of fun.
Man, what a fascinating opportunity and experience.
Yeah.
But so along the path at Shaw, you escalated in your trajectory there, and you're the president of Shaw Environmental and Infrastructure, and then you ended up as a president and chief operating officer of this very significant publicly traded company. You had $4 billion or more in annual revenues. You had 22,000 employees, 180 offices. I read, and just an incredibly impressive position with an unbelievable company. So. Tell it. You've got locations all over the world, right? So, give us a little insight. You just mentioned China.
Yeah.
But give us a little insight. Like, what is a day in the life of the president of a company with international operations look like, and as far as travel and different time zones and meetings and stuff like that? What was that experience like?
Oh, it's a lot of it's a blur. Well, first of all, we had a lot of great people. I mean, that's it was your president, but I stepped in and I had some great guys. Dave Chapman was running our fabrication unit. You had Ron McCall running our maintenance unit. You had Andy Dupuy and running our construction operations. You had trying to remember all the names. Abe Fatimazada was running our engineering, which at the time we had combined some power and process, and within that we just had a lot of depth. So I was a young guy. I was a lawyer, M&A guy. I'd kind of gotten involved in the integration of the companies after we bought them, and really was, buying the companies was relatively easy. It wasn't always easy, but making it work after was the hard part.
Right.
And that challenge fascinated me. And so I kind of moved over to the business side, and it began with a model that we said, well, we want the same team going and do the due diligence from an operational, but also financial and legal, to take it forward after the acquisition. So we did that on the IT group. The first one we did was we bought our largest piping system competitor in England, and I led that team, and then we went over there and ran that. And I lived in England for a while, and then I came back. And then when we did that with the IT group, so our team kind of went over there. We did all the due diligence, and when we bought it, we set it up and ran it, and it did really well. I mean, part of it is timing is everything. So
right.
The anthrax and a lot of things going on. So there's some understanding that I didn't know everything, and you had to have people around you who knew a lot more than
right.
you, that you trusted. That was a big part of it. But you had to get involved in things. Obviously, we were still integrating companies. We were still trying to figure out how to make things work. We're still trying to drop cost out of it. We were buying bankrupt companies for the most part. Stone & Webster and IT Group were bankrupt. They had some really good operations, but part of the reason they were bankrupt, they had some struggles. So you had performance issues. You were trying to pull people in to fix that. So I'm very proud about how the company did that and became better. We started improving performance-wise, safety, all those things that you look at, during that tenure. But one day I may be flying to Dubai to negotiate a change order on a big facility in the Middle East. I've made a few trips to China where combination of inspecting some of the projects, but also business development things. You did a lot of. We're still I was not as active, but we did a lot. In terms at that time, when I was E&I president, I had started our discussions with Westinghouse about buying Westinghouse, and then Toshiba came in and really had a lot more resources than us, so we became a partner with them. So I did a little bit about when I became president. Like Gary kind of took that over, and Jim was still very involved in that. So it was just so demanding. At the time we had our third child in 2000, our fourth child in 2002. So, on the home front, you have 4 kids, 6.5 years apart, and you're traveling. And even when you're in town, somebody who's working their butt off for you wants
right.
a piece of your time. They want to go to dinner. They're struggling. Maybe they're struggling with their family. Maybe they're struggling with their team or their job or something like that. So it was you're getting pushed and pulled from every angle. And so I think frankly, I got burned out. I'd never had the right type of training for that. It was all on the job training, and I allowed myself to get burned out. So I decided, and it was a long discussion. Katrina hit at the end of 2005, and our disaster recovery business, which we had been working hard. When I left E&I division, we had been really working hard to get into the FEMA work. We wanted to really do some work out in Indonesia after the tsunami out there. And we had some employees that were actually on vacation, actually on his honeymoon there, and had helped save some people. And he had a big passion. He wanted to go do that. And USAID had brought in FEMA to help the U.S. effort. So we got to know FEMA. We didn't get any work there. But 2 weeks before Katrina, we were in the FEMA offices in D.C. giving a big presentation going back to timing. And they called us up a couple of nights before the storm and said, this is coming to your backyard. You got, if you can't do it there, you can't do it anywhere. And I think our first contract was $100 million with $100 million ad. And I think we did like $6 billion of work on that contract. And the Corps, we had done Blue Roof, which is not sexy work at all. After hurricanes, we had won some awards in South Florida the summer before. And they looked at our proposal and said, well, looks like you could do the unwatering in New Orleans. I said, sure, we can. And so, I mean, a lot of it's just doing a really good job on small things, and you get the big opportunities. But 2005, that blur, and so by the end of 2006, my run was over. But it was a heck of a run. It was I learned a lot of both the good stuff, and I learned some stuff the hard way, especially how to manage myself.
Well, you had a lot of interesting things that followed that, and we will get into that as soon as we get in this word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. We would like to thank Modus for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Who is Modus? Modus is a facility services company that works in the e-commerce fulfillment industry across the United States. What do? They like to say they take it from the conveyor to the dock door. Well, what does that mean? It means that they're building the pick stations with the cable management. They're installing guardrails and bollards. They're putting down floor marking. They're putting up aerial signage. These guys build fencing systems, shelving systems, and racking systems. They also do rack recovery for when there's rack failures. They also install dock levelers and dock doors. Modus also installs ASRS systems, which is automated storage and retrieval systems, as well as other robotics projects. They've worked for the largest e-commerce retailers in the world, and they can work for you. If you need to find Modus, you can reach them online at modusmoves.com. And we are back with Tim Barfield, President of CSRS. So, Tim, the interesting thing is you end up in the public sector as your next stop, and just curious, like, how you got there. Like, what's going through your mind? I mean, you're in this high energy, publicly traded company, and then you're going into government.
I told you I was burned out, and one of my friends, Eddie Rasponi, told me he had been through something very similar, and his advice was just take a year off, and don't do anything. I didn't listen to him. So I started doing a little consulting stuff for people and looking at things. And then Bobby Jindal called me. He was running for governor, and he said, if I win governor, would you be interested in being in my administration? I said, sure. What do you want me to do? He said, I don't know. What do you want to do? And so it kind of started like that, and then he became governor. And I think he had a few different opportunities, and we kind of agreed that the Department of Labor, which became the work, one of his priorities was the redesign of workforce development and working very closely with the community and technical college system and the universities, as well as the LED and economic development. So that was really fun.
Look, he assembled some really bright guys, some brilliant guys that joined you there, and it was very impressive to watch because, of course, he is brilliant himself and young, and it was just energizing to see that he was able to pull someone to the table of your caliber.
There were a lot of good people around there. That was an amazing group of people. You're right.
And you did that for a while, didn't you? I mean, how long were you with the workforce?
I was there a year and a half, and they asked me to become executive counsel in the governor's office, which I have to say, it's 20/20 hindsight. It's maybe a little clear, but I had a little trepidation about that. It'd been a while since I practiced law, but then I found out it was more politics than anything.
So what is that? What did that job entail?
So you're the governor's executive counsel, and you're not a civil service employee, so you're representing the governor's interest across the board. So you're dealing with the legislature, you're dealing with issues. You could be dealing with a death penalty case. You can be dealing with pardons. You can be dealing with a legislative issue. You could be going out and promoting the governor's policies and trying to get votes for a bill. You could be dealing with one of our state's Native American tribes and an issue they have. You can be dealing with a parish. I remember dealing with Jay Darden. We had some conflicts in Jefferson Parish over some election things, and so we were trying to figure that out.
So did you have a staff?
I had a staff. Liz Merrill was my deputy executive counsel, and she was great, a lot smarter than me. She had worked at the U.S. Supreme Court and was a much better lawyer than I was, and so she made me look a lot better than I was on the legal issues.
Well, I mean, you had a staff of like 900 when you were heading up the Louisiana Workforce Commission.
Yeah.
And so it must have felt pretty freeing to go and do that next job with Jindal.
It's different. People bring issues, right? Leadership of people has its challenges, but they're people, right? So you have a lot of things to leverage yourself with. The executive council was more issues and crises and challenges from that end. You had no shortage of challenges, so they didn't always involve your people and your direct reports, but you may be dealing with a secretary or another cabinet member of an agency or department or a university system, or you may be in the middle of a fight between a legislator and the superintendent of elementary and secondary education. And so, I don't think of it, I wouldn't say it liberating. I found that job to be as challenging as any job I've ever had.
Yeah.
And I will say this, even the governor and his team knew, and they asked me if I was interested in coming back, that I didn't want to go back to that job. I didn't. I mean, Matthew Block is a friend, and I really have a lot of respect for what he does. You're getting hit from all angles. I learned a lot, but it was just the politics. I mean, I've never felt like the politics motivated me, but you were dealing with politics all day, every day.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
you wrapped up that, and you did re-enter the private sector for a couple of years.
Yep.
With a position with Amedisys, and but then you came back to the public sector, and that was still with Jindal.
Yeah, it's very different. So I went back. I went to Amedisys, and right after I joined Amedisys, that industry, you had some industry-wide investigations or hearings on some billing practices that really didn't end up anywhere, but it kind of kept that in. The reason I went there was really to help grow it from an M&A standpoint, and I had public company experience, so Bill Bourne recruited me, and he was another great visionary and a very passionate leader in that field. He had been, he kind of come up through the ranks. He was a nurse, and his frontline employees, just a tremendous relationship with them. And then you had healthcare for the Affordable Care Act came out, which was very disruptive, and I think ultimately it's probably going to be good for that industry. But it was just chaos, and I was really overpaid and wasn't doing what I was there to do. And so Bill asked me to kind of stick around and help with some of the issues. But Jindal's team called and said, we'd love to have you come back. What do you want me to do? And he said, well, we really need some help at the Department of Revenue. And it's funny, when I was in law school, I had wanted to go to tax school because I had a tax class I just loved.
Really?
And so I said, that sounds interesting. And so I said, yeah, I'll do it. And then went back there, and they were under a lot of turmoil. Just, the revenues were down, a lot of cuts, and they're a revenue agency, right? So, but I'll say that both the workforce and the Department of Revenue, those are jobs I've enjoyed as much as anything.
That's
done
fascinating.
In my life. I really love public service.
So I was curious, when you're doing that, going in and out of the public-private sector, you're taking pretty significant pay cuts when you're doing that. But there's a value to loving what you do as well.
Yeah.
I was curious if you saw glimpses or expressions of entrepreneurism in the public sector? I mean, I think that people would have their opinion that might not exist.
I think there's a lot. I think, first of all, in a lot of the design, so the statutory design of many programs is often very entrepreneurial. Where it struggles is in the implementation, right? So I think you see a lot of. I'll tell you, one of the most entrepreneurial persons that I came across in my career, period, is Jimmy Leblanc at the Department of Corrections, and
Really?
he is a fascinating man, and he gets so much undeserved poor press. When we were going through budget cuts, and he would come up with ideas about how to redesign their services and take care of prisoners in a safe way. I mean, I'll say that when I was working for Judge Palazzolo, he had the prison overcrowding case. And I remember learning then that there's no politicians that really get any points for funding prisons, right? Oh. And we saw that day in and day out with that case for the year I was there. And then circling back, and we have all these cuts, and I get to know Jimmy LeBlanc, and I see how creative he and his team, and Jimmy came up through the ranks. I mean, he spent his whole career there, but how he was able to think outside the box and how he's willing to try new things was just fascinating, and continues to do that. So he's one of the guys, an incredible work ethic. And he could have retired probably 10 times over at that state, and he keeps grinding it out every day, and a big heart for the prisoners too. And
That's
so
awesome.
it's been really encouraging to see that. But I think we were very entrepreneurial in some of the workforce redesign we did. I think we started looking at our department, at the Department of Revenue, and said, they're cutting employees. We can't keep doing business the same way. And then I found out, right after I took the job, we were 3 versions behind on our administration software, and our hardware provider for the scanning system was no longer servicing the equipment. The software provider on the scanning system was no longer supporting it. And then South Carolina had a data breach. Literally within the first few weeks I'm starting, and I'm literally staring at the ceiling again for the 10th time saying, if this breaks, we can't even, process a tax return, and I'm going to look like the worst secretary ever. So, the crux of it is that, we had to be, my team was incredibly, I'll give you a great example. We had, when I started there, we had 35-minute call wait time when you call the Department of Revenue. Without spending $1, we lowered that to 6 or 7 minutes. And our goal was to get it to 1 or 2 minutes. We felt like if we could use outside call service to handle some triage, we could have gotten to, 1 or 2 minutes, just like Visa and MasterCard do when you call to pay your bill there. Every now and then they put you on hold. And so that team, a lot of them, those were, I think, all employees that had been there a long time, and one guy that came back to help me who had been there. And they just got in. When you gave them the license to go figure it out, maybe you had to put it there, but we redesigned our whole department to make it much more efficient. We increased the amount of revenue per auditor, but we also audited less low-risk clients, So there was some really cool stuff we did there.
Well, it's kind of interesting. If you look back over your career at Shaw, you had 22,000 employees. When you were working with some of the Louisiana departments, you're 700, 800, 900 employees. Amedisys was a big publicly traded company as well. But now you're at CSRS and you have 120 employees. And I'm just curious what that feels like for you, and can you talk about that for a second?
Well, I think in a broad spectrum, you can't deal with more than 6 people anyway, right? So, I deal with a lot more than that, don't get me wrong, but if you have more than 6 people reporting to you in the types of jobs we're in, it's very difficult to do that. So when I was at Shaw, I had 6 people reporting to me. Now that I'm here, I have 6 people reporting to me.
Yeah, interesting.
The numbers are smaller. The geographic sort of range is smaller or more focused. we don't do anything international to speak of. We supported Canes a little bit on some of their international stuff, but the I love the challenge. I felt like in CSRS, everything I've done in my career kind of came together in one place, and it's really worked out that way. And we got some really fantastic people. I've enjoyed working for and with Michael Sanji. He's just been, we have a lot in common. I mean, he's an engineer and approaches things very methodically, and I'm a very process oriented person when it comes to people issues. So we kind of have a good fit there, and we have a really good team of people that grew up there, and we've been able to bring in some really good people too. So I think the most gratifying thing. I wake up every day and I'm motivated. I'm an owner. I'm the president. You know the feeling. You only eat what you kill, so to speak, right? So you got to get out there and you got to work this thing. But also go to sleep every night knowing that the people around me, I trust them and they're good people, and you're doing a lot to. We do a lot to develop our people and grow our people. That's one of my passions. Is how do we help people develop? I did that at Revenue. I thought we did a great job with that and some of the development stuff, and we've kind of CSRS. Even before I was really one of the owners and president, they were allowing me to kind of do some of that stuff, and it's fun to see people grow, learn about themselves, but that strength-based leadership, to learn how to use the strength of others to help cover the company's needs and your needs and everything else. So it's a really good place to be, and a lot of good ideas, a lot of entrepreneurial people, So we're a lot of sort of business entrepreneurs within a group of other entrepreneurs. So it's really interesting.
Well, my experience over 30 years is they've always had really good, competent professionals. And so just curious, as you look out, over the next 5 or 10 years, what your vision for CSRS is. And, with as much M&A experience as you've had in your career, do you see as that being a part of the mix of growing the company?
I certainly hope so, but it's going to be very selective. I mean, I think one of the things, we're doing it with our money. So there's 8 owners, and we're doing it with our money, or it'd have to be a real compelling deal to bring in an investor or somebody. All of the owners are employee owners, and we all work there. So like a lot of small firms, different battle. We've looked at some things that had some real attractive things, but there were some other things that we just struggled maybe with. So I think we will be real selective in doing it, or it's going to be really compelling that we're willing to bring in some outside investors. And we've talked to some outside sources of capital. We have an ownership transition program. So our real focus is, attracting the right people and developing them, and hopefully inviting them to become part of the ownership team. And that's been real successful. I give Kurt Soderberg and Michael and Ron Rohde credit for, they started, I think they got some interest years ago from one of the big companies, and they started thinking about where do we want to go, and they decided they wanted the company to survive and thrive after they were there, and they put in this ownership transition program. And so one of the reasons they brought me in was to help implement that in a better way, because they kind of had a gap in maybe some agent experience that they needed to run the company. So part of my personal mission, but as well as my company mission, is really develop people so we have that ownership transition. So an acquisition could fit in, but I think I've spent more time on focusing on what people we should acquire at every level, but certainly at a level that helps round out our service offering and brings relationships on a business development standpoint to us.
Well, Tim, you're a special guy. You have an incredible amount of experience behind you, and I know that CSRS is really going to realize the benefit of you leading them. So congratulations on all of your accomplishments, and the best of luck to you and your company moving forward.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate to be here, and I'd say the same about you. Very impressive with all the things you're involved in, including this podcast. It's been really interesting to see this develop.
Good. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Tim Barfield needs to write a book. He has done so many impressive things over his career in the private sector and the public sector, from managing hundreds of employees to 25,000 employees. I think the thing about Tim, beyond an intense curiosity and a hardcore work ethic, is he has this innate leadership skill. And he's a very peaceful guy. And I think it makes for a real strong leadership capability. And he has maximized that in all these opportunities. So we know that he will continue to succeed in all that he touches, and we're grateful that he was able to join us. If you would like to find Tim, you can reach him online at csrsinc.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to the Next Entrepreneur podcast. We'd like to thank our title sponsor, Mainspring Companies. It can be reached online at mainspringcompanies.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach us at ask@nxtentrepreneur.com. You can subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Stitcher, or iHeartRadio. You can help support our podcasts by leaving a review on Apple Music. You can follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please share this episode with your family and friends. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. They can be reached at propelyourstory.com. Today's episode was produced by Daniel Sagona.